Welcome to The Test is History, a detailed delve into Test cricket's truly terrific tussles. This episode focuses on Test number 4, the only test of the 1880 summer between England and Australia, which took place at the Oval Cricket Ground, Kennington, London, from the 6th to the 8th of September 1880. In the early 19th century, long before the first aeroplane flight, an eccentric resident of Bristol by the name of George Pocock aspired to invent a form of air travel. To this end, he created various devices designed for aviation. Requiring passengers to partake in his questionable experiments, Pocock commandeered his children. In one story, Pocock's daughter, Martha, was given the daring honour of being sailed across Clifton Gorge, strapped into a chair, attached to an array of huge kites. Whatever the truth of this tale, young Martha Pocock did not perish attempting to fly across Clifton Gorge on her father's improvised flying machine. In fact, she survived to adulthood and married a GP called Henry Grace. They had 9 children. Henry was a keen cricketer, and his 5 sons all played the game with him. So did his nephew and grandnephew, George and Walter Gilbert. They were joined by Martha's brother, Alfred Pocock, and nephew, William Pocock. But it is the sons of Henry and Martha on whom this story will focus. Their third son, Edward, who was also a qualified surgeon, became known to cricket followers as E.M. Grace. He was one of the greatest cricketers of the 1860s, and after that an important figure in the fledgling Gloucestershire County Cricket Club, as was their youngest son, Fred Grace, sometimes known by his initials, GF. Fred also became one of the most renowned cricketers of the age. But the most famous of these brothers was the 4th son, known to most of his family by his middle name, Gilbert, although his mother called him Willie after his first name. To the rest of the world, he was known by his initials, WG. From his emergence, W.G. Grace was universally recognised as the greatest cricketer of his era. In 1866, he scored 224 not out for the rest of England against Surrey. It was the season's highest score. In 1868, he averaged 65.33 in first-class matches. The nearest batter to play in more than 10 innings averaged over 30 runs fewer. He also scored a century in each innings of a match, a feat which had only been achieved once by William Lambert back in 1817. In 1869, he was top run scorer with 1,320 runs, and his average of 57.39 was 26 more than the only other batsman to score more than 1,000 first-class runs, Harry Jopp. In 1870, he scored over 700 more runs than Ted Pooley in second place, and his average of 54.78 eclipsed Pooley by over 30 runs. The following year, he scored 2,739 runs at a colossal average of 78.25, scoring 10 centuries on the way. In 1872, he was again leading run scorer, averaging twice as many as Richard Humphrey in second place. In 1873, he scored more than 1,800 runs at an average of 72.2, over 700 more than Harry Jopp, who averaged 25. In 1874, he was leading run scorer and topped the averages, with Jopp again the nearest contender, but significantly behind. 1875 was a relatively quiet season for WG, but he was still the only batsman to score 1,000 runs. His brother Fred also making 978 runs that year. But in 1876, WG scored an incredible 2,622 runs, almost 1,400 more than Ephraim Lockwood in second place. WG topped the runs and the averages table again in 1877. WG had reinvented batting. He had demonstrated that a batsman could play off the front foot and the back foot, as well as performing a range of shots to all areas of the ground. One ex-cricketer who had played against the greatest batsman of the previous generation, Fuller Pilch, saw WG and marvelled, "Why, this man scores continuously from balls old Fuller would have been thankful to stop." Bowlers now had to change their tactics to face him. The game of cricket was formalised to accommodate his talent, with counties playing increasingly organised first-class cricket, forming the basis of what became the county championship. WG dominated matches, both statistically and physically, his thick beard and giant frame making him one of the most recognisable figures of his day. But while WG remained prolific, by the late 1870s he had qualified as a GP. This raised a question over his cricketing future. He had vanquished his opponents to such an extent there seemed nothing left to prove. Expecting his retirement, the MCC even granted him a testimonial. Then, in 1877, James Lillywhite led an English team of professionals on a tour of Australia, playing and losing at Melbourne Cricket Ground what is retrospectively regarded as the first ever Test match. An Australian team proceeded to tour England in 1878, and on the 27th of May at Lord's, spearheaded by the bowling attack of Harry Boyle and the demon bowler Fred Spofforth, they bowled a very strong MCC side, WG included, all out for 19, winning the match by 9 wickets. A new international rival had emerged. Australia was surely a challenge the champion cricketer could not resist. However, when a mostly amateur English team, led by Lord Harris, toured Australia the following winter, a match in Sydney against New South Wales was disrupted by a pitch invasion when umpire George Coulthard, recruited by Lord Harris, gave New South Wales opener Billy Murdoch run out. In the resulting melee, Lord Harris was struck by a whip or a stick. England batsman Monkey Hornby attempted a citizen's arrest, and one of the England professionals allegedly made a reference to sons of convicts as he used a stump to try and defend Lord Harris. The English team had lost a test in Melbourne the previous month and was scheduled for a rematch, but this was cancelled following the contretemps. Lord Harris was not quick to forgive and went on to question Australian sportsmanship in the English press. One cricketer by the name of Walter Haddo, who had been part of the English team who had toured Canada in 1872, went even further, writing, "It is sincerely to be hoped that we have seen and heard the last of Australian cricket and cricketers, at any rate until they have learnt the true spirit in which the game should be played." But an Australian team, self-financed, arrived on English shores in the summer of 1880 with the hope of playing big matches. They were led by Billy Murdoch, who belatedly replaced Harry Boyle as captain, although Boyle remained part of the side. Murdoch's proximity to the dreadful events in Sydney might well have exacerbated the frosty reception they received. They faced something of a boycott, seemingly at the behest of Lord Harris and other cricketers from the ill-fated Sydney match. In fact, their agent and former opponent from 1877, James Lillywhite, was only able to organise a handful of matches for them. This caused significant financial worries for the Australians, not least Murdoch, who had recently been declared bankrupt following a disastrous shipping investment. The Australian tourists were reduced to advertising for fixtures and playing provincial odds games. In one such match at Southampton, the Australian 11 faced a team of 18 by the name of St Luke's. Two men who made themselves available for St Luke's were Walter Gilbert and Fred Grace, WG's cousin and brother respectively. The presence of Fred Grace in the opposition gave the Australians a direct channel of communication with his famous brother. Both Fred and WG saw that if the Australians were ignored, they might never return. WG made representations to the MCC to organise a game between the tourists and an all-England 11, but not enough English amateurs were prepared to play. This scuppered the plan for the proposed match at Lord's. However, WG and Surrey Secretary Charles Alcock persuaded Lord Harris to relax his hostility towards the tourists and captain the England team in a match at the Oval. Charles Alcock still had an uphill task trying to recruit players. Two Yorkshire professionals, George Ulliott and Tom Emmett, who had witnessed the events in Sydney, would not play at the Oval, nor would the amateur Monkey Hornby. There were also logistical problems, as it was now late in the summer and many cricketers had prior engagements. Alcock had to make a journey up to Scotland to coax two of the team, all-rounder Alan Steele and wicket-keeper Alfred Littleton, away from a shooting trip to partake. Alcock's efforts ensured an English team was eventually selected. In the meantime, the Australians suffered a major setback. Playing against the 18 of Scarborough and District, they faced a fast bowler named Joseph Frank, who appeared to be throwing the ball. Captain Billy Murdoch asked the opposition to take off the bowler after the first innings, but this request was ignored. Not wishing to provoke a diplomatic incident which might threaten the match against England, the Australians played on. Frank hit several of the Australian batsmen, breaking the finger of Frederick Spofforth. Known as the Demon Bowler, Spofforth was undoubtedly the most dangerous weapon in Australia's bowling attack. They were without him for the test. And so onto the Oval, the teams lined up as follows. Opening the batting for England was the coroner, E.M. Grace, who had performed well for Gloucestershire against the Australians earlier in the summer. Alongside him, his illustrious younger brother, the Doctor, W.G. Grace. In at 3, Bonnie Lucas of Cambridge University and skipper of Surrey, who played under Lord Harris in Australia. At number 4, the Nottinghamshire all-rounder, Billy Barnes. Batting at 5, skipper Lord Harris, and at 6, his Kentish teammate, Frank Penn. At 7 and 8, fresh from their shooting trip, Lancashire and Cambridge all-rounder Alan Steele and wicket-keeper Alfred Littleton of Cambridge University and Middlesex. The inclusion of Fred Grace at 9, the youngest of the Grace brothers, was the first time 3 brothers appeared together in a test match. At 10, the wily and accurate medium-pace bowler Alfred Shaw, and at 11, his Nottinghamshire teammate, the left-arm quick Fred Morley. For Australia, the stonewalling batsman and fine mid-off fielder Alec Bannerman was to open alongside his captain Billy Murdoch. The steady Tom Groob, another renowned fielder, was at number 3, with the attacking Percy MacDonald, nicknamed Greatheart, at number 4. At number 5, Jim Slight was followed by the Prince of Wicketkeepers, Jack Blackham, at 6. At 7, the gigantic George Bonner came in before Victoria's fine bowler Harry Boyle. Young off-spinner Joey Palmer, who had taken 9 wickets against Lord Harris's tourists on debut at Melbourne, came in at 9. Team manager George Alexander was a makeshift replacement for the Demon Spofforth and made up the tail alongside William Moole. It was a glorious late summer day, and on winning the toss, England captain Lord Harris naturally chose to bat. Over 20,000 spectators crowded into the Oval cricket ground on stands improvised from water carts and steps from office stools. The roofs and balconies of overlooking houses were also packed, and some even climbed onto the top of the famous gas holder to watch. The Australians, led by Billy Murdoch, were cheered onto the pitch. There were even louder cheers as England's openers, the Grace brothers, emerged. Harry Boyle of Australia, who had helped famously skittle out that strong MCC side 2 years earlier, bowls the first ball of a Test match in England to England's E.M. Grace. Like his famous sibling, Edward Grace was a medic, and prior to his brother's emergence, the coroner, as he was known, was seen as the most dangerous batsman in England. The Grace brothers provided England with a strong start, scoring 60 in less than an hour, with opening bowlers Boyle and Joey Palmer unable to penetrate. Australia brought on George Alexander and Alec Bannerman as change bowlers. Bannerman was very much a part-time bowler of round-arm medium pace, but he gained the distinction of taking the first wicket in a Test match in England. When E.M. Grace was caught by George Alexander, England were 91 for 1. In at 3 was A.P. Lucas of Cambridge University and Surrey. He was just in time to see WG make his 50. Bunny Lucas was known for his sound defensive technique, but as England passed 100, he attacked the bowling of Palmer and Bannerman. The runs flowed, and by lunch, England were 167 for 1. With WG 82 not out. How Australia missed the Demon Spofforth. 10 minutes after lunch, WG Grace made history, becoming the first English player to score 100 in a Test match. It came in 211 balls, taking 155 minutes and included 6 fours. It was fitting that the first century in a Test match in England was achieved by England's most renowned cricketer. WG's second wicket stand with Bunny Lucas also became the first century partnership in Test cricket. Together they put on 120 runs. Bunny Lucas reached his 50 off 116 balls, but then played on to a delivery by Bannerman. Billy Barnes, the Nottinghamshire all-rounder, came in at 4. Barnes was the top run scorer in England in 1880. He made 28 in a 58-run stand with WG as England passed 250 before also playing onto his wicket to another part-time bowler, George Alexander. England were 269 for 3. Captain Lord Harris joined WG at the crease. A drive and a cut for 4 saw WG Grace pass his 150. It had taken 291 balls and he had scored 12 fours. But then Joey Palmer bowled his off stump. WG had made a masterly 152 and received a rousing ovation as he walked back to the pavilion. England were now in the commanding position of 281 for 4. Lord Harris was joined by his Kent teammate Frank Penn. They put on 41 more runs before Penn was bowled by Bannerman for 23. Alan Steele of Cambridge University in Lancashire was next in. He shared an 82-run stand with Lord Harris. Lord Harris became the third England batsman to reach 50 in a home test, scoring his half-century off 91 balls. Lord Harris had been enjoying a successful domestic season, finishing third in the averages out of all batsmen who had played a minimum of 10 innings. Shortly afterwards, he fell, caught at slip by George Bonner off the bowling of George Alexander. But by this point, England had passed 400, with every England batsman scoring 20 or more. Wicket-keeper Alfred Lyttelton came to the crease. 6 runs later, Alan Steele's was the 7th wicket to fall, caught by Harry Boyle at mid-on off the bowling of William Moole. Then Fred Grace fell for a duck, edging a ball by Moole to Bannerman at first slip. England were 410 for 8. That brought an end to the first day's play. It had been a memorable day for England and an exhausting one for Australia out in the field. Another huge crowd gathered the next morning. Play started at 11:05, but the England innings was over a quarter of an hour later. Alfred Shaw failed to score before becoming Moole's third victim, clean bowled. Fred Morley scored 2 but was run out. Wicket-keeper Alfred Lyttelton had made 11 not out, and England finished on 420 all out, a significant total. Australia's bowlers had completed 210 4-ball overs, but their frontline bowlers, Boyle and Palmer, had been curiously ineffective. Bannerman, Moole and Alexander claimed 8 wickets between them. In the case of Moole, his 3 for 23 proved to be a career best. Now Bannerman had to open the batting with his skipper, Billy Murdoch, in their ears the chatter of the Grace brothers, for whom the middle of the cricket pitch might as well have been a family dinner table. Despite being known as a stone waller, Bannerman hit his first 2 balls off Nottinghamshire quick Fred Morley for 4. Australia had reached 28 when Murdoch was caught by Billy Barnes off an Alan Steele leg break for a 19-ball duck. 11 runs later, and the value of a high-quality pace bowler in a test attack became apparent as Nottinghamshire's Fred Morley clean bowled Bannerman for 32. Tom Groob made 11 before Steele penetrated his defence. Then Morley got his second wicket, Jim Slight, who was caught by Fred Grace, also for 11. Morley then caught and bowled Australia's wicket-keeper, Jack Blackham, who had failed to score. Percy McDonald's resistance ended at 27 when he was caught by Billy Barnes, also off the bowling of Morley. The 6'6" George Bonner, known as a big hitter, lived up to his reputation. He played an enormous shot from Alfred Shaw high into the sky. It was up in the air for so long that the Australian batsman had already run 2 before the ball descended into the hands of Fred Grace. The applause was so loud it could be heard from Vauxhall Station. Bonner was out for 2. Next, Morley bowled out Joey Palmer for 6. Australia were 113 for 8, and Fred Morley had collected the first 5-wicket haul in a test match in England. England's champion, W.G. Grace, was involved in the final 2 wickets of the Australian first innings. First, he caught George Alexander for 6 off the bowling of Alan Steele. Then, W.G. got his first wicket in Test cricket, dismissing William Moole, caught by Morley also for 6. Harry Boyle, batting at 8, was left stranded on 36 not out, Australia's top score in a disappointing total of 149. England enforced the follow-on. Australia had to bat again, still 271 runs behind. For the second time that day, Alec Bannerman opened the innings, but this time Harry Boyle joined him. The bowling attack they had to face was the Nottinghamshire duo of Fred Morley and Alfred Shaw, who were on their way to becoming the 2 leading wicket takers in England for the 3rd season in a row. Despite his relatively small stature, Morley could generate surprising pace with his round arm bowling. The nagging accuracy of the vastly experienced Shaw provided the perfect foil. Bannerman's innings was a short one. He had made just 8 runs when Bonnie Lucas caught him off the bowling of Alfred Shaw. Captain Billy Murdoch, on a pair, joined Harry Boyle in the middle. But then, disaster! Boyle was run out. He had made just 3. Australia was still 258 runs behind and had already lost their openers. Worse was to come when Tom Groob was out first ball, caught by Shaw off the bowling of Morley. It was Morley's 1050th first-class wicket. Australia were 3 wickets down and 257 runs adrift. The match looked over and spectators prepared to catch their trains home. Billy Murdoch and Percy McDonald steadied the ship and took the score to 97. Lord Harris replaced Morley and Shaw in the England bowling attack with Billy Barnes and W.G. Grace. Barnes was then taken off in favour of Alan Steele, who Murdoch hit for 2 fours in his second over. McDonald had hit consecutive 4s and had made 43 when W.G. Grace made a successful LBW appeal. Murdoch guided Australia past their 100, but then Jim Slight attempted a slog to get off the mark to W.G. Grace. Lord Harris caught the catch at long off. Slight was out for a golden duck. and Australia were 170 runs behind and 5 wickets down. An innings defeat looked inevitable. Australia's wicket-keeper Jack Blackham joined Murdoch and initially concentrated on survival, but both he and Murdoch managed to score 4s off Alfred Shaw, and Blackham seemed to have found his touch when he presented an easy catch to E.M. Grace at point off the bowling of Morley. He had scored 19 and Australia were 143 for 6. George Bonner put up some resistance and helped take Australia to close of play. They were 170 for 6, still 101 runs from avoiding the innings defeat, but Billy Murdoch was playing a captain's innings and was now 79 not out. Back in the pavilion, Billy Murdoch made a wager of 1 sovereign with the man who would become his great friend W.G. Grace, that he'd pass W.G.'s score of 152. W.G. gladly accepted the bet, as Murdoch was now running out of partners. The public sensed this too, and a far smaller crowd appeared the next morning, believing the match to be almost over. This was emphasised further when Alan Steele broke George Bonner's defence, bowling him for 16. 6 runs later, Steele caught and bowled Joey Palmer. Australia had only made 17 more runs and were down to their last 2 wickets. Once again, the prospect of an innings defeat loomed. The Australian captain was joined by team manager George Alexander at the crease. Alexander initially concentrated on defence, while Murdoch continued to bat with fluency. Alexander then started to attack the bowling of Alan Steele, bringing Australia to 200 at 10 minutes to midday. Steele was replaced by W.G. Grace, and Murdoch crept towards his century. Then, on 99, he was hit amidships by a ball from Morley. Play was stopped for several minutes as the medics were called upon, but Murdoch stepped delicately back to resume his innings. Finally, at 12:30, he scored the single to reach his century, to the cheers of the small crowd. George Alexander then hit Grace for 3 and Morley for 4, but Morley was not to be denied. He had Alexander caught at slip by Alfred Shaw. Alexander had scored 33 of a 52-run stand. This took Australia to 239 and was all the more impressive considering Alexander's lack of match practice. Morley now had 8 wickets in the match. Australia were still 32 runs from avoiding an innings defeat and down to their last wicket. Last man in was William Moole. Moole's cricketing career was a short one. He would later become a judge and a politician. He made an unconvincing start to his innings, missing several balls, but Murdoch hit W.G. for 4. Australia reached 250 and Alan Steele was recalled to the England attack. However, Moole snicked him for 4. Murdoch then hit 3 off Morley and Australia were close to making England bat again. Another single by Murdoch off Steele was followed by an off-drive for 4 by Moole. A single by Murdoch guided Australia past the 271 runs required to ensure England would bat again, to the obvious pleasure of all those watching. The Australian last wicket stand was not finished there. Murdoch drove Shaw for 4 and Moole took 7 off and over. England brought Fred Morley back into the attack, but while he and Shaw stemmed the flow of runs, there was still no wicket. Replacing them with W.G. and Lucas did no good, as both Murdoch and Moole found scoring shots against the England bowlers. Australia passed 300 runs. On came Frank Penn to replace W.G. At the other end, Murdoch caught Lucas for 3. This brought him to 152, equal to W.G.'s first innings score. A maiden followed, then an interval. Billy Murdoch's wager with W.G. Grace was still intact. At 10-3, the players returned. William Moole drove Alan Steele for 2. Billy Murdoch then scored a single off Billy Barnes to take him to 153 not out. 1 run past W.G. Murdoch had won his wager and accepted WG's hearty congratulations, along with the sovereign that he would wear on a watch chain for the rest of his life. But almost instantly, the Australian innings was over. Barnes produced a quick delivery to remove Moole. Australia were all out for 327. Murdoch's rearguard had seen him face a mammoth 358 deliveries and score 17 fours. England went into bat, needing 57 runs to win. It seemed a simple proposition, and sensing this, Lord Harris readjusted the England batting order. This meant that Fred Grace became the third member of his family to open an innings for England, this time with Alfred Lyttelton. After Lyttelton had taken 2 runs off Harry Boyle's first over, Fred achieved the ignominious feat of becoming the first batsman to bag a pair in a test match, bowled second ball by Joey Palmer. Bunny Lucas made only 2 before Palmer also had him, caught by wicket-keeper Blackham. Then, with the score on 22, Alfred Lyttelton had his stumps disrupted by Palmer. England were 3 down. 9 runs later they had lost 5. Billy Barnes and E.M. Grace falling in quick succession to the bowling of Harry Boyle. Palmer and Boyle were bowling well, and England were in crisis. They still needed 26 to win. Finally, WG was sent in, joining Frank Penn at the crease. It was not a moment too soon for England. Penn went on the offensive quickly, hitting 2 fours and a 2 off Palmer. But then he presented a chance to slip. Fortunately for England, Bonner could not keep hold of it. Penn then hit 2 more, followed by a boundary. A superb pot for 4 by WG off Palmer brought the scores level, and then WG pushed a single to ensure a 5-wicket victory for England. The crowd cheered, and the Australians sportingly applauded WG and Penn off the field. From the pavilion, the Demon Spofforth watched on, possibly wondering whether the result might have been different had he been available. The 1880 Test match had seen the Grace brothers play prominent roles. E.M. had faced the first delivery, Fred had taken an iconic catch, and WG had dominated, scoring a match-winning century and hitting the winning runs. But the Oval was to be the last time the 3 Graces appeared together on a cricket field. Fred Grace had developed a slight cold by the time he went out to bat on the final day. Nevertheless, from the Oval he set off to Stroud to play a match for the United South, where he performed creditably. But in the meantime he was soaked by 2 rain showers, making his cold worse. After a short recuperation at home, he went to Basingstoke to play in a benefit match. He should have withdrawn, but members of the Grace family were loath to renege on a cricketing commitment. Fred stayed at the Red Lion Hotel in Basingstoke, and by now his cold had affected his right lung. His condition worsened still. On the morning of the 22nd of September 1880, just 2 weeks after he had played for England, Fred Grace passed away at the age of 29. The death of this hugely popular player shocked the cricketing world. 3,000 mourners attended his funeral. Fred Grace holds a pivotal role in cricketing history. If he hadn't turned out for St Luke's against the Australians earlier that summer, his famous brother might not have been encouraged to persuade the powers that be to organise what retrospectively became known as the first Test match in England. WG had found the game of cricket when it was a pre-industrial pastime. He had taken it on a mammoth journey to where it became an international sport. So cricket supporters can only be grateful that his grandfather's questionable aeronautical experiments on Clifton Gorge ended without incident.